सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
The 20th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party has taken place. As expected, Xi Jinping is set to be re-elected for an unprecedented third term. The outcome of this election is even less unpredictable than Congress Party's president's election. In that case, at least there are two candidates. In this case, there was no candidate. This was just to be an endorsement. So that's happened, and the boss has spoken. The boss, in this case, being Xi Jinping. So he has spoken like the boss that he is in his country and with his own party, but also suggesting to the rest of the world about the kind of boss he is to them, or he should be to them, or he should be acknowledged to be by them, and the reasons why he thinks that he, as the leader of China, deserves it. Also, his speech and this entire convention, the centerpiece of which was his speech, that is very significant because he has now underlined some major shifts from China's recent past. Now, if you are interested in strategic affairs, this last week has been very significant. First of all, the US White House, that's Joe Biden's White House, they issued their national security strategy for 2022, in which there was predominant attention given to China. So China, depending on how you count it, if you count China, only the word China, do control plus F and then do a search, then with that search you might get it 9 times. But if you look at Chinese, PRC, etc., all of that, it comes to 55 times. So China has been the burden of the US national security strategy this year, as it might have been last year also, but that's kind of a strong restatement. Incidentally, in that national security strategy, India gets a mention 8 times, Indo-Pacific more significantly gets a mention 32 times. So I'll share a link with you also. As things turned out this week, I was not able to dedicate a full episode of CTC to the US national security strategy. That's also partly because I was traveling overseas. I was in the US for a couple of days and I got caught up in time lag, etc. So that besides, the fact is that Joe Biden has spoken out on his vision of the world, because after the national security strategy release, he also delivered that famous speech, or infamous. If you are a Pakistani partisan, Pakistan's protesting, they summoned the US's ambassador to the Foreign Office in Pakistan to quote unquote admonish him, or at least gila shikwa karne ke liye, to complain to him or to remonstrate with him, what have you done? Because when your favorite teacher pulls you up or upbraids you like that, it really hurts. So America, which counts Pakistan as a major non-NATO partner, major non-NATO ally, its president, Joe Biden, in that speech called Pakistan the most dangerous place in the world, the most dangerous country in the world, and also said it's a nation with nuclear weapons without any cohesion. So Pakistan is an ally of China. So strategically, this has been a very busy week. But the crowning point in this week, the top of the mind, is Xi Jinping's speech. Now, in his speech, he's mentioned the word security or national security how many times? 50 times. It's a long speech. 50 times he's mentioned it. He, in fact, what he spoke out was an abridged version, but you can get the full speech translated in English. I will share a link with you also. Otherwise, you can read the columns written by Adil Brar, our very young China specialist, who knows the language, who studied the language, tracks Chinese media, social media, everything meticulously, and on top of it all has a very fine young mind. So read his articles. But this time, Adil points out 50 is fewer times than he mentioned national security in the last National People's Conference. But again, we have to underline the fact this National Congress's speech is about half the length of what it was in the previous one. So 50 times national security. It tells you where Xi Jinping is coming from, because he thinks that China has now become a state with a certain economy, with a certain technological prowess, most importantly for him, and this trend runs through his speech also, and with several other events that happened in the run-up to this Congress and along this Congress, that he also sees China has become now a very predominant military power. And what's the point of having that military strength if you cannot leverage it in many ways? Now, if you see this speech, it's tough for me to summarize the speech, and you don't need that summary because you can see it in many places. I'm just trying to draw some highlights from it in terms of what might be relevant to us. So see also this article by Anant Krishnan, who's the Hindus correspondent in Beijing. Anant is also a China specialist, knows the language, has studied it very keenly. So I'll share his article in the Hindu with you. And in this article, Anant Krishnan points out a very interesting paradox in Xi's mindset. And he says Xi's worldview seems to be, because simultaneously it's a juncture for China to lead the world, but it's also a world in which many external threats lurk for China. So it's a feeling of great power, rise to great power. I must play the role of a great power, but at the same time a feeling that there are many threats lurking for me. So this is a bit of a paradox, and if you read the speech and if you distill the speech, some of these elements come out. Now, first of all, internal politics. In internal politics now, Xi Jinping has been raised to the core of the party. Now, that's not a formal status in China, but core of the party is a leader who then is trusted enough to take the party and the country in any direction he wishes to. Now, it's not as if the leader needed any formal approval to do this, because once you are the leader of the Communist Party in China, the party owns the nation, the party owns the military. The Chinese PLA, in fact, is the only major military in the world that serves not the nation, but that serves the party. Now, you might say it serves the nation through the party, but the party comes first. The party owns the army. The party has a central military commission which runs the army. The president also happens to head the central military commission. So the party is that powerful in China. So 4 Chinese leaders, Xi Jinping is the 4th. So Mao, Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin and Xi Jinping. He is the 4th raised to that level of core of the party. Remember, even Hu Jintao was not given that title. So only 4, there have been 20 party congresses, as you can see. It's a 100-year-old party, but only 4 leaders have reached that status. And Xi Jinping is there. Now I'm reading all the texts coming out of the Chinese media, translated in English by other institutions, which says that core of the party means he's now empowered to drive China's destiny where he feels fit, which means a formalized dictator. Now, how big has this conference been in China? You can have the BJP national executive or whatever, in the old days, AICC, etc. Nobody bothered so much, because you know that in a truly democratic country, these statements at these big congresses are important, but then policy is made, politics shifts, power balance shifts almost on a daily basis. If not on a daily basis, then at least periodic basis, but not in a Communist Party run state. That's why it's so important, because this is the only politics they've got, and they see it only once in 5 years. So in this case, again I take this from Adil Brar's column, he says, and this is the count until Sunday evening our time, 56 billion times the official press release on this Congress had been read on Chinese social media, and 1.5 billion times was the hashtag 20th Party Congress seen on Chinese social media by Sunday evening. By the time you are watching it, the number would have gone much higher. That was the kind of interest in this Party Congress. Again, the burden of Xi Jinping's speech and also what came out of other actions is that, first of all, there is a clear expression that we are now clear number 2 in the world. But the other thing is, now that I have my 3rd term in this term, so under my leadership now, China should grow to number 1 position. China is poised there, pushing US to number 2. So here is a quote I read from Alfred Vru, Associate Professor at National University of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew Center. He says that it shows that the clash with the US will now be intensified. There is no chance of tensions being lowered. And in fact, if you read the American national security strategy, Both are mirror images. Each one is mirror image of the other. So each nation has the similar kind of apprehensions and a similar kind of nervous tension about the other. So one complements the other. I told you some things happened on the sidelines of this Congress which are very important and which tell you what is central role Xi Jinping has given to the Chinese military. Now one of the invitees to this Congress. Remember, in this is an invitees only event. You don't have to set an RSVP, and who attends and who doesn't attend is a very important point. In fact, just a sidelight: the first National Congress 1921, only 12 had attended. Now it was about 2290. So one of these delegates was Chi Fabao. I hope I pronounced his name right. He was the colonel who led the Chinese forces in the Galban clash and was wounded. He was an invitee at the Congress, and in the run-up to the Congress, Chinese official media was running interviews with him in which he cried because he got so emotional apparently, and there is a quote from him. These are obviously translated from Mandarin into English. He says, and I quote, "We must not keep the territory of the motherland and lose it. High altitude, low temperature, hypoxia, strong radiation, the frontline environment is harsh. Wearing a hood, wearing cotton clothes and cotton pants, covered with 2 quilts and frozen to sleep at night, that's how we guard the border." And as he said this, he broke into tears. Now this tells you that this is also the first time in almost 40 years that the Chinese PLA faced combat in which lives were lost. Now they might say they lost only 4 lives. We don't know how many they lost. All the estimates seem to be higher from credible sources, and Chinese can hide casualties. But the fact is, even these casualties, even if it's only 4, I don't believe so, but even if it's only 4, that seems to have hurt the Chinese and woken them up that war fighting is a real thing. Or they would not put a senior officer at operational levels, the highly decorated Colonel Fabao, talking like this at their party convention. He also explains, and we are taking a minute over it because that's the only way India came into the proceedings. So he says that foreign military, doesn't name India, foreign military violated consensus and pitched tents across the line, which led to confrontation. And the commentary with this on the official channel then goes on to say that this is what the Chinese soldier went out to fight and defend their territory. In front of you is the siege, behind motherland. Chief Abao and his comrades defended with their lives. That is the CCTV audio. So once again, a very big build-up to Galban clash here without mentioning India. But this also reminds us that they put army at the center stage of their politics and power projections. So they invited 9 delegates from one army division. Lots of army delegates were invited to the People's Congress. I told you the army is an instrument of the party. They are not of the republic. 9 delegates from the Red Army Division were invited to this Congress. Red Army Division is the one that operates in Ladakh in the relevant areas. So we knew what the Chinese were saying. And again, if you want to see the analysis of what was coming up, so Chinese People's Daily started putting out daily commentaries titled He Yin, H-E-Y-N. These daily commentaries started explaining Xi Jinping's policies, thought, particularly his foreign policy, or what is called as diplomacy, right? Diplomacy, to Xi Jinping karta hai to diplomacy. And some understanding of this we get from authors Xu Jin and Du Jian from Chinese Journal of International Policies. There they say, and I quote, "Guiding other states will replace the policy of never taking the lead," right? The earlier policy was stay silent, bide your time, no longer so. Now, guiding other states, which means maybe Vishwaguru, right? And I have the power to Vishwaguru. India can keep imagining, and India can keep imagining becoming Vishwaguru with soft power. I will do it with hard power. So again I quote, "Guiding other states will replace the policy of never taking the lead, which is a policy for weak states, or a policy that signals weakness." That is the policy of never taking the lead. That was the past from which Xi Jinping is breaking away now. China needs to be more assertive and more proactive, to take a stand more often and to take a greater responsibility. That's what these authors have said. And once again, there is discussion. Now, when you're dealing with Chinese politics, you confront these Chinese expressions, which are almost impossible to translate. And I am, in great humility, I must state that I am no China expert. So I can only read and try and explain to you as best as I can. So the Chinese view of the world, Chinese foreign policy, how does China project itself to the world? So earlier it may have been a Mandarin expression ba, B-A, which is like a soft hegemony, which means, theek hai na? Is this all right? So proffer advice in a way which is persuasive. Now, if you Google it, you will find 4 different meanings of this. So I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible, and I do hope I'm not getting it wrong in subtlety. In principle, I think it's all right. That is now yielding to something called Trungxia, which is a tributary system, which is a system in which the other states are like your vassals or your tributaries. They pay you a tribute, and that's a system that the Chinese have had in the past. I'm avoiding using the expression supplicant because that might be too strong, and once again I'm conscious of my inadequacies with Mandarin language. Then if you want to understand more about what's happened, I also have some more readings for you. So I'm sharing this Twitter thread with you from Professor Yang Zhang. He's a professor at Washington-based American University's School of International Service. So he, in his Twitter thread, has listed some books which he suggests you could read. So I'm not listing all the books, particularly many of these are not in English language. You will see the Twitter thread run on my screen, and you can pause it and you can take the details. But there is a bunch of books, 2 or 3 I will mention to you. One, The Man Who Changed China. This is Robert Lawrence Kuhn on Jiang Zemin. Once again, even Yang Zhang's lament seems to be that Jiang Zemin has been completely banished from the Chinese thought, from the party system by Xi Jinping, because he was the builder in many ways of the new China. He's the one under whom this economy boomed in China, but he is now completely kept out. There is also Rethinking China's Politics by Joseph Fewsmith, subtitled Power Shift between the 11th to the 19th Party Congress. Now, why is the 11th Party Congress so important? 11th Party Congress took place in 1977. 11th Party Congress, after 11 years of cultural revolution, etc., completely repudiated the cultural revolution and also condemned the Gang of Four. So officially the era of Mao ended in 1977. That's why the 11th Party Congress was so important. And that's when Hua Guofeng became the head of the party. Now, 1977, you know what? Very often we need to say, "Arey, such historic things is happening in these times. Such historic things have never happened." Has there been a year like 2022? Has there been a year like 1984? Has there been a year like such and such? Every year in the world, epochal changes take place. 1977, see in China, Mao era ended formally and the Gang of Four was condemned. 1977, in India, also is the first time that the Congress party loses power, and that is when the Janata Party comes in. Mrs. Gandhi loses power after the emergency, and many other things happened elsewhere in the world. So I'm just digressing a little bit to tell you that in the history of the world, there is no such thing as a dull year, because something or the other is always happening. And anytime you want to say, okay, I'm having a competition for the most newsy year or the most significant year of the last 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, there will be many claimants. Competition will be really tough. There is also another book, Core Leaders in China, that is Xi, Mao Deng and Jiang Zemin by Shuiji Guo. Now, I know it's tough to be a scholar on everything, but in case you wanted to read any of this stuff, I'm sure you can source it. I am just listing some of these for you. And there is also a 4th book which I find interesting, and I will try and source it myself and maybe read it over some travels, which is by Joseph Torregian, a Yale professor, Prestige, it's titled Prestige, Manipulation and Coercion, Elite Power Struggles in the Soviet Union and China after Stalin and Mao. Now, in this long speech, there's a Reuters story which puts out a bunch of highlights, high points from the speech. So I'm sharing that link also with you, and these high points will also run on my screen from Reuters. So I'm leaving out the stuff he says about COVID, what they call as dynamic zero COVID policy, stuff he says about Taiwan, because that's pretty much well known. But I see some correction or some shift from Chinese kind of capitalism, which made China such a big economic power. After all, it's now more than 5 times India's GDP. China has become a very powerful economy now and very powerful military. So he's saying my policy would be to increase income of low income people, expand the middle income groups, standardize the order of income distribution, and standardize wealth accumulation mechanisms. So does it sound more like capitalism or communism? You figure that out. So what he is doing is he is now shifting the party policy decisively from where Jiang Zemin might have left it. And then he goes on to say, but we must build high-level socialist market system, unswervingly support and encourage the privately owned economy, and give full play to the market forces, while at the same time give much better play to the government. So you know what it means. Then he says something which is fascinatingly familiar. He says China needs self-reliance. So, Atmanirbharta. What is it that he's worrying about? He says things like food grain production, etc., etc. But most importantly, he's talking about technology, innovation. And he's saying we must build the world's biggest, finest talent center, and we must focus on innovation. And when he says we must strive for competitive advantage in international competition for talent. Now, for the Chinese to enter the race for global competition for talent, I don't know if they can do it if their society and government and politics continues to run the way it is, because talent usually would go where there is a lot of openness and liberalism. Talent doesn't grow in dictatorial systems. On foreign policy, strategic issues, he again says that look, our major country diplomacy will have Chinese characteristics. And what are these Chinese characteristics? So again, the usual thing, we will not be hegemons, but we will stand against all unilateralism, protectionism, and bullying. Now, bullying, humiliation, it's surprising how often do you see and hear these expressions when the Chinese speak, and very often references are to what happened 120 years back. So again, in our country, when people say humiliations of the past, this era of that era, you can see one more similarity in the way in which the Chinese think and the Indians think and we Indians think. The difference being, in India, immediately there will be 20 other voices saying, no, you are not right, there was no humiliation in what you are complaining about, or maybe this is revisionist history, or maybe someone else will say, no, there was humiliation, but not in this era, that era. So that does not exist in China. In China, the boss speaks. A couple of other interesting things that Xi Jinping says. He says, for example, he is now going to launch a very aggressive policy to boost birth rates. Remember, this was a country and this was a party which enforced a one-child policy, and it's now paying for it, because China's population has stopped growing. In fact, even the head of the RSS, Sarsang Chalak, in his Dashera address had said, his exact line, China Buddha ho gaya hai. So China's average age is now 37, 38 years, which is very high. China is not producing enough babies. Its population will begin to decline soon, which means the country is aging. And as the country ages, its economy begins to feel the effects, which means your dependency ratio, the number of people living who depend on younger people earning, that goes up, and the country's economy and overall strength, gross national power or GNP, that comes under stress. So he says there will be a policy to boost birth rates. There will be a proactive national strategy in response to population aging. So this is a country which until 10-15 years ago had the most aggressive population control policy in the world. Now it has to worry about population aging. But you know what? You can force people to not produce more than, say, one child, two child. You can put limits or no child at all. So you can force people to not produce children, but you cannot force people to produce children. And that's what's happening right now. So much as Chinese Communist Party is trying, today's young Chinese are not willing to produce more children because they are all working, they are prospering, they don't have the time, and they don't want to make the commitment. But again, finally, to sum up, the biggest takeaway is that the idea of the peaceful rise of China, peaceful rise, biding time, hiding brightness, etc., that is now over. And Xi Jinping has blown the bugle that this is a new China. And this is a China remolded to the concept of Chiangguo, as I read it in reporting coming out of China. Chiangguo would mean more or less like great power. So this China will now act like a great power, and I think there will be a lot more excitement going ahead. So right now, while one game is playing out between Russia and the Western powers in Ukraine, the larger one lurks around the corner. That is between the US and its Western allies and China. It will put US's Western allies under extreme pressure. We are already seeing the new German Chancellor sort of dithering from the position that his predecessor might have agreed to take a tougher position on China. So there will be pressures there, and India will not remain unaffected by this, because Xi Jinping has made one more major difference to his strategic worldview, which is that earlier China's immediate border crisis or border tensions with various countries, they were seen as local problems. Now they are being seen, they've been redefined as threats to Chinese sovereignty. And in his speech, he's also said that China must learn to win regional wars. Once again, my parting words can only be tighten seat belts, because we might be heading for more turbulence.